proceed, I'd like you to make the following announcement.
Recording in progress.
Delegating the hybrid, sitting enjoy the same power and the privilege that apply in sitting of the National Council of Provinces. Okay, let's do this one. Honorable members, I would now like to ask to make observation of moment of silence for prayer and meditation. Thank you. I did. Siyakuba, honorable members. Honorable delegate, before we proceed, I would like you to make the following announcement. The hybrid sitting constitutes a sitting on the National Council of the Provinces. That the delegate in the hybrid sitting enjoy the same powers and privileges that apply in the sitting of the National Council of Provinces. For the purpose of the quorum, all the delegates who are logging on to the visual platform shall be considered present. Honorable delegate must switch on their videos if they want to speak. Delegates should ensure that microphones or their gadget are mute and mute always remain muted. All delegates in the chamber must connect to the visual platform as well as insert their cards to register on the chamber system. Honorable delegates who are physical in the chamber must use their floor microphones. That all delegates must participate in the discussion through their chat room. The interpretation facility is active. Permanent delegate, members of the executive, special delegate, and SALCA representative on the visual platform are requested to ensure that the interpretation facility on their gadget are properly activated to facilitate access to the interpretation services. Permanent delegate, special delegate, SALCA representative, and members of the executive in the chamber should use their interpretation gadget on their desk to access the interpretation facilities. Honorable delegate, in accordance with Council Rule 2291, there will be no notice of motion or motion of notice. Honorable delegate, before we proceed to the subject for debate, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome the MECs, all permanent and special delegate to the House. Honorable members, We shall now proceed to the subject to debate on land reform, complete ownership, title deeds to lead, reform beneficiaries, as well as ownership to those living on trust land within communal areas. Honorable members, I will now call upon the Honorable R. Jackson from DA to open the debate.
Good afternoon, colleagues in the National Council of Provinces. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to open this debate on an important issue regarding land. Chair, issues of land restitution, land reform, and land tenure reform are not divorced from each other, but remain interlinked and must be discussed together in order to complete the somewhat contentious puzzle on the issue of land in South Africa. Debates on the past and contemporary history on issues relating to land in South Africa emphasize our diversity. While some politicians abuse this to sow division and hatred, if discussed and managed in a mature and realistic manner, progressive land policies have the potential to become a source of development, food security, and unity. In his book, Feeding Frenzy, The New Politics of Food, Paul McMahon correctly states that, and I quote, especially in Africa, land has cultural, sentimental, and political meaning. It is a reminder of past dispossession, a symbol of present dignity, and a source of future security. We must view land within its historical context, and in these discussions, we cannot ignore the colossal upheaval, carnage, and massacres during the Mfokani in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Similarly, our discussions about land must also reflect on what Saul Plaatje referred to when he indicated in his political tract, Native Life in South Africa, that, and I quote, awakening on Friday morning, June 20, 1913, the South African native found himself not actually a slave, but a pariah in the land of his birth. This quote was referring to the notorious 1913 Natives Land Act. This act was preceded by a history of race-based dispossession that includes the 1897 Zululand Annexation Act in the Natal Colony, the Glen Grey Act in the Cape Colony, an 1853 Volksraad resolution in the Transvaal Republic, and a ban of freehold for Black people in the Free State Republic. And of course, this was followed by the 1927 Native Administrations Act, the 1939 Bantu Trust and Land Act, the 1937 Marketing Act, the 1946 Colored Persons Settlement Act, the 1959 Promotion of Bantu Self-Governing Act, and the 1971 Homelands Constitution Act, to name but a few. These most prominent pieces of legislation only formed a part of the 60 racially discriminating laws passed between 1913 and 1948, and a further 161 between 1948 and 1991 that resulted in the uprooting of about 3.5 million South Africans of various races. Chair, this was a short summary of the historical legacy that we inherited in 1994 and have to grapple with since then. I hope that the legacy of our children and grandchildren inherit from us will be a different one, hopefully one that is based on both redress for past injustices, but that also constructively address the current national and international demographic, economic, and food-related realities. The Restitution Act was implemented to deal with the constitutional imperative of land restitution, which allows individuals who lost their property as a result of post-1913 discriminatory legislation to submit claims for redress. Redress through land restitution has been delayed by administrative backlogs in dealing with restitution claims by the state. Furthermore, the fact that about 92% of claimants opted for cash in the place of land should be an important guideline for policies relating to redistribution. The cash claims enable individuals, many of whom currently reside in urban areas, to purchase property and build homes and livelihoods in our towns and cities. This is also an indication of a realization among restitution claimants that land in South Africa is not an instant source of wealth. Without ignoring the words of Paul Macman that I quoted earlier, we must approach the issue of land in a manner that takes into account our current realities of rapid urbanization, the need for food security and economic challenges, with the only certainty being the uncertainty of an unpredictable future. Land reform, what is also referred to as redistribution, and security of tenure are not restricted to rural areas, but should be an important part of our urban planning. In this respect, we support policy proposals that will optimally enhance land usage and productivity in rural and urban areas. Such policy options must create an environment that is socially just and fair, and in which existing rights are carefully aligned with our national objectives of redress through pragmatic, constructive, and productive redistribution. Chair, I've outlined the historical need for redress and would now like to deal with some important environmental and economic issues relating to land in South Africa. A 2015 World Wildlife Fund South Africa report indicates that while 69% of land in South Africa is estimated to be good for grazing alone, only 13% of land is arable, good for cultivation, and 3%, only 3% is considered to be high potential agricultural soil. This implies that South Africa is not conducive for the type of agriculture envisioned in multi-beneficiary cooperative land reform projects that government has tended to implement and that are set up for failure. How does our agricultural sector survive in a country that is not agriculture friendly? This is explained by Jeffrey Herbst and Greg Mills in their book, How South Africa Works and Must Do Better, in which they state, and I quote, like any other sectors, those who survive and prosper will be the better farmer, marketer, and entrepreneur, improving yields and technology and inserting themselves into local and global value chains. Farming requires a combination of skills and expertise, capital, modern infrastructure and equipment, and of course land, which may be owned or rented by agricultural entrepreneurs. The success of commercial farming in South Africa is based on economies of scale, which has resulted in about 20% of commercial farms supplying 80% of all food in our country. This is supplemented by small-scale and subsistence farming. Despite some incremental improvements over the past 27 years, equitable access to land remains out of reach for most South Africans. Untransformed historical spatial arrangements ensure the entrenchment of inequality. Approximately 17 million South Africans still live in former homelands, which are in some instances on the most fertile land in the country. Last week, the DA Shadow Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Honorable Thandeka Mbabana, emphasized comments by the ministry that citizens living on 10.5 million hectares of land in rural areas still live in property owned by apartheid-era state institutions. This statistic supplied by the ministry is an admission that the ANC-run government flagrantly violates the fundamental rights of rural communities to own their property as stipulated in Section 25 of the Constitution. While the Constitution does not instruct the state to give everyone land, the Constitution instructs the state to foster conditions which enable citizens to gain access to land on an equitable basis. Control over much of the land in communal areas rests in the state. Individuals and families occupying this land are subjected to various forms of land rights that are in most cases informal, uncertain, and vulnerable. So we can ask, what can be done to remedy this situation and ensure that our rural populations have access to security of tenure, in other words, own their own property? Chair, allow me to propose, among others, a few of the most important DA proposals in this regard. First, we must create a proper land registry by surveying all currently unsurveyed land in communal areas. Understanding where the boundaries between properties are is the first step in improving tenure security. Secondly, we must provide security of tenure through private title to all landholders who want it. This approach addresses the distinction between individual and communal title, as it would be up to the landowners to decide for themselves where they want to own the land, whether it's individually or whether they want to form a communal property association. However, if a landowner opts for individual rather than communal title, they must get it. Third, include communal use rights such as for grazing or accessing water points as a condition in the title deed, as it is already standard practice in servitudes in many cases. Fourth, couple the process of surveying and titling individual plots of land with an infrastructure needs assessment and development that focuses on access to roads, water, financing, training, and mentoring. This will ensure that those private landowners who want to enter agriculture are able to do so successfully. Fifth, undertake to protect the rights of beneficiaries to participate in the cultural life of the traditional community of their choosing. In other words, with the exception of assigning control over land ownership to private owners instead of traditional authorities, all other rights of traditional authorities would remain undisturbed and protected. Six, a comprehensive land audit needs to take place with a proper land registry. Provision must also be made for protection against predatory buyers through the provision of minimum land values by the Office of the Valuer General. These aspects will form a part of a DA's private members' bill that will be tabled in the National Assembly. There's no provision anywhere in the Constitution that provides for any individual to be barred from owning property. In fact, Section 25, the property clause, makes it clear that no one may be deprived of property, and that a person or community whose tenure of land is legally insecure as a result of past racially discriminatory laws is entitled to tenure which is legally secure or to comparable redress. A recent High Court judgment indicates that people living on customary land under control of the Ingonyama Trust are the true and beneficial owners of that land. The court also found that the Minister of Agriculture Land Reform and Rural Development has neglected her legal duty to respect, protect, and promote these informal land rights. The courts will similarly reject legislation that infringes on the constitutional rights of individuals to own property and have such property arbitrarily taken away from them by the state. The ANC's treatment of people in rural areas as second-class citizens by banning individuals from owning their land violates these provisions of the Constitution, as well as the right to equality. The ministry confirmed that land remained registered in the name of the apartheid state. Listen to this, the reason: because no legislation currently existed to transfer land held in trust by the government to rural communities, 27 years after 1994. As Honorable Mbabama correctly indicates, this too is nothing less than an admission of outright failure by the ANC government to enact legislation to provide tenure security and ownership rights to rural communities. Contrary to its own Freedom Charter, the ANC-run government has been fixated on preventing people in rural areas from owning land and on expropriating current landowners, rather than focusing on land reform models that are based on redistribution and economic empowerment. Chair, Venezuela and Zimbabwe are examples of where the legislated nationalization of land and other property has devastating impacts on the economy and food security of those countries. In Venezuela, the economy collapsed due to policies of nationalization, which included expropriation without compensation, leading to massive famine. It was reported that by 2017, more than 3/4 of Venezuelans had lost an average of 12.5 kilograms in body weight due to national food insecurity, and 61% of the population are going to bed hungry. Similar policies regarding expropriation of land in Zimbabwe led to the collapse of the economy and currency, an unprecedented 90% unemployment and famine. The many economic refugees in South Africa from Zimbabwe attest to this. All economic and political commentators, as well as international precedent, indicates that giving a government powers to arbitrarily expropriate property without compensation creates economic uncertainty and new threats. Such threats include an unwillingness by international investors to invest in a country where their property rights are not secure, a further capital flight and disinvestment, and an unwillingness to invest in agriculture, especially by banks. Agricultural economist Wandile Shihlobo indicates that agricultural debt was 187 billion in 2019. What will happen to this debt if we have expropriation without compensation? We must also acknowledge the High Panel's report, the conclusions that indicated that the reason for the failure of land reform is a result of corruption, the channeling of resources to the elites, and a lack of support. And Chair, we in the Free State have experienced that in the Gupta-linked Vrede Dairy project, where for 9 years the beneficiaries were excluded from the project. There was massive corruption and channeling of resources to the elite. The DA fought for the rights of these beneficiaries in Parliament, the legislature. We went to the Public Protector, the Zondo Commission, and to the courts. Chair, land redistribution in South Africa must be individual and family-based, with tenants and farm workers given priority and support in order to give them access to the necessary markets and enable them to become active in the commercial farming sector. Property rights must be legally secure as envisioned by the Constitution. Land redistribution must not be restricted to rural areas. Policies and legislation must make provision for inclusive urban development that includes residential, commercial, cultural, and recreational land to cater for the rapid urbanization that is a characteristic of our modern societies. When it comes to justice for our most marginalized and rural urban communities, the DA will fight to free our people who are still enslaved in an apartheid-style property arrangements that the ANC continues to protect. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thanks very much, Honorable Member. Honorable members, I would like now to recognize honorable members. I would like to recognize Honorable E.M. Mtetwa Nyambose.
Thank you, Chairperson, for the opportunity to address this House in this important debate. Honorable Minister, Honorable Deputy Minister in the House, and the media and fellow South African, good afternoon. Honorable Chair, the Democratic Alliance has called for this debate in the complete ownership, through the title deeds land to the land reform beneficiary, as well as those living on the trust land within communal area. This is important debate, Chair. Safe to say that we, however, need to expose this hypocrisy of the Democratic Alliance in them having to call for this debate by the House. I heard the previous speaker even distorting the issue of the Mfekane War and other matters, quoting Section 25A. You must read that section incomplete, especially Section 25, subsection 6. In exposing them, Chair, that the organization has failed, I'm going to also to highlight areas what the African National Congress have done, as he has quoted that the African National Congress has collapsed and he has totally failed for this state for dealing with this matter. I'm going to highlight all those issues and expose this issue of DA. This is a highly and opportunistic topic that they wanted to come and grandstand, as he was distorting some of the fact in this debate. In exposing the DA chair, his hypocrisy, I will also reflect briefly on the progress and the policies of the African National Congress, as I've said, since the dawn of our democratic dispensation. In so doing, we need to remind ourselves that homelessness and landlessness was the creation of the colonial and apartheid regime. The African National Congress chair was, among other things, established to ensure the restoration of African people dignity by restoring to them their land, which was taken away from them through the mighty of the guns and sword. The kind of inhuman land disposition of the Black African majority by an illegitimate and illegal government of the colonial Britain and apartheid was a very traumatic experience whose memory lingered on the minds of many Black Africans even today, Chair. The legacy of colonialism and apartheid gave us the current challenge of poverty, inequality, unemployment, and with the women facing the triple oppression on the basis of their race, class, and gender. The African National Congress, in adopting the 1955 Freedom Charter that was misquoted by now, boldly asserted that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, and Black and white. And this declaration The African National Congress still stand by it. Even to this day, we still stand for that one. The idea envisaged in the Freedom Charter have been enshrined in our democratic constitution under the Bill of Rights, and these are the guaranteed rights to, for example, adequate housing, including access to ownership of land and properties, Section 25C, Section 25, subsection 6. This is the one, Chair, that I was saying it was misquoted. Of the constitutions of republic guarantees the security of land tenure, including security of land tenure to the most vulnerable members of our community, such as labor tenant, farm workers, people living in the urban informal settlements. During the period that the ANC was bent towards its unbanning, Oliver Tambo played a very important role in the development of the ANC constitutional guideline for a liberated new democratic South Africa that will be based on the constitutional order. It is the African National Congress policy that of the government to ensure that the land is redistributed to all those who need and work it. The African National Congress acknowledged that under the apartheid people had their land taken away and were not allowed to own land or properties. In the 1992 Ready to Govern policy guidelines, the ANC said the state should play an active and important part in obtaining the redistributing land, and it should have the power to take the land in a number of ways, including through expropriation. The ANC further said that agricultural must be organized in such a way that it serves the interests of all the people and equally distributed amongst the people. The ANC, Honorable Chair Mangwenya, has a balanced approach towards the radical land reform program, and this is the base on the 3 pillars of restitution, redistribution, and security of land tenure. The DA right now has chosen to focus on the security of land tenure for opportunistic purpose, as I've stated in my debate, but this is not unfamiliar with their opportunistic tendencies. Same with what it has been people have been busy, been confused with the grouping of the EFF. The ANC embraced the mixed tenure approach to our land reform program. Historically, Chair, the impact of colonial and apartheid destruction of African families their livelihood will continue to become a topic of great importance for many politicians and legislators and academic scholars. Of one of the golden threads that will emerge from such exercise is the hypocrisy of some, like the horrible member of the DA that he has just raised this matter this morning, that the hypocrisy is to deal with the reality of South African situation. What is this? What is the reality of South African situation, Chair? This question needs an honest reflection answer. Land ownership patterns within the country are very skewed towards a white minorities and white males for that matter. In terms of the 2017 land audited report, Chair, I've noticed the other figures that were there. 94% of the total 121,924,880 hectares of the land in the country is registered in the deed office. This means, Chair, that there is about 6% of the total hectares in the land that is not registered with the deed office. And this is mainly trust state land in the Eastern Cape and Limpopo provinces. Honorable Chair, trusts own about 89,523,044 hectares of the 114,223,276 hectares, which is 94 registered within the deed office. Individual own about 37,800,986 hectares, which is all plus minus 39% of the total registered land with trust at 29,291,857 hectares, which is 31%. And companies at 23,199,904 hectares of 25% at CPOs at 3,549,489 hectares. The core ownership 883,588 hectares on 1%. The same individual owned the most of these companies trust on the CPOs. In the Western Cape, Chair, the total registered hectares of land is 12,946,300 and 11,502,427 hectares on a private own. And the state owns 1,040,801 hectares, while people on the 2,764,652 hectares of land with African at 53,287 is a disgrace hectares, and colored people at 561,315 hectares. And India, it's 174,865 hectares. These pictures, Chair, I have just purposely given you the correct figures as per the research, because I wanted to clarify this fact that this picture is much more concentrated on the Northern Cape and the biggest province with a total of about 37,288,800 hectares, 35,210,998 hectares is in private owned and white owned, 11,498,449 hectares. African on only 69,350 hectares. The state owned land, the state owned less than 20 million hectares of land. The land ownership pattern are even much more skewed when it comes to the percentage of women accessing the ownership of the land. Given the patriarchy nature of our society, the landless of women was further exacerbated by the promulgation of the 1913 Native Land Act and other racial discriminatory piece of legislation that empowered the state to remove and forcefully relocate the entire African community under the loose idea of betterment planning. It seeks, Honorable Chair, to reverse this legacy. The ANC government has developed a Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act, SPLUMA, that created an overarching legislative framework for the spatial planning policies and land uses management for the entire country, including rural and informal segment. Chair, this piece of legislation is applicable to all three spheres of government. And unlike the apartheid laws, SPLUMA puts an emphasis on the readiness of social justice, equity, and also inclusion of inclusion, public participation, and transparent decision making and awareness of the role of the properties, housing, and environmental management in creating functional and efficient and human settlement. We know that, Chair, the apartheid government has created better town planning in the formal white areas and inferior planning for formerly homeland and black township. And this was evident in the recent flood that took place early this year in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. We have experienced that even in the Eastern Cape and some parts of the Northwest. What the DA's hypocrisy would not tell us, Chair, today is the fact that when the union government decided to reduce the African population to the formal homeland, they did do out of the desire to occupy for themselves prime land and to further deprive them of any real resources to improve and develop their areas. It is for this reason, Chair, that we find a huge infrastructure backlog. Yes, Chair.
Honorable Mthethwa,
Yes, Chair.
ixesha likshayile sana.
Your time is up, honorable member.
Let me conclude, Chair.
No, likshayile. Dali khalili bhele.
15 wam kanjalo, Chair.
No, mangayenza njalo kuwena kumele ngenze kinina nonke, and I don't want you to do like that.
No, I'm not arguing with you, Chair. I thought my 15 minutes was not over.
Iphelile 15 minutes, sir. Thanks very much, Honorable Mthethwa. The next speaker is Honorable N. Peters, Eastern Cape MEC, Rural Development and Agrarian Reform.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chairperson and the honorable members and honorable deputy.
Honorable member, vala i-video uzilungise kahle. Vala i-video.
It's switched off, Chairperson. It's switched off, Chairperson. Sorry, Chairperson. Can I continue, Chairperson?
Honorable member.
Honorable Chairperson.
Comfortable manje la uhleli khona.
Ndisemotweni, Chairperson.
Okay, sana. Ungaqhuba.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. And Honorable Deputy Chairperson of the NCOP, honorable members of the House, delegates from provinces, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Nelson Mandela said in 1995, with freedom and democracy came restoration of the right to land, and with it the opportunity to address the effects of centuries of dispossession and denial. At last we can, as a people, look our ancestors in the face and say, your sacrifices were not in vain, close quote. 22 years later, Honorable Chairperson, we are virtually connected to advance the debate that Nelson Mandela and his peers spearheaded to finalize what they started, and that we are able to look at them as brighter stars and say, be assured the baton you left with us with regards to land reform is in good hands. We will do whatever we possibly can to ensure that your dream is fulfilled and that your sacrifices are not in vain. Honorable Chairperson, we thank you most sincerely for inviting the Eastern Cape to debate about a topic of national importance, land reform, which is very close to hearts of our people. We specifically discussed complete ownership or title deeds to land reform beneficiaries, as well as ownership to those living on trust land within communal areas. I am certain that our people are patiently waiting for this matter to be taken to its logical conclusion, especially in communal areas. Honorable members, communal areas are characterized by severe poverty, overcrowding, and isolation from economic growth and opportunity. One of the issues that inhibits development is the clarity is the lack, sorry, Chairperson, is the lack of clarity on the status of land rights in communal areas. Our constitution clearly articulates our mandate in section 25.6 of the constitution. A person or community whose tenure of land is legally insecure as a result of past racially discriminatory laws or practices is entitled to the extent provided by the Act of Parliament, either to tenure which is legally secure or to comparable redress. Furthermore, the guidance from the 1997 White Paper on Land Reforms was that the aim of tenure reform is to bring all people occupying land under a unitary, legally validated system of landholding, so as to secure different forms of land tenure, resolve tenure disputes, and provide alternatives for people who are displaced in the process. The common challenges facing communal land users or occupants are as follows. With land being a shared resource, there is no incentive to conserve land. It is difficult to make sound agricultural and land use planning and use it. It is also difficult to implement sound livestock and grazing management, leading to overuse and degradation. Land disputes are common, especially with regards to boundaries. An individual cannot use land as a collateral to get loan. The current challenges on communal land tenure system can be traced back to the wars of colonial dispossession and was entrenched through the system of apartheid and legitimized through various legislation, South Africa Act of 1909, Native Land Act of 1913, Black Administration Act of 1927, the Native Trust and Land Act of 1936, Group Areas Act of 1950, the Promotion of Bantu Self-Government Act of 1959, the Bantu Authority Act of 1951, and the Bantu Homeland Citizenship Act of 1970. Honorable Chairperson, communal land is governed by various pieces of legislation, of which some were enacted prior to the democratic government and are still in existence, such as Deed Registry of 1937, State Land Disposal of 1961, Sectional Titles of 1986, Expropriation Act of 1975, Upgrading of Land Tenure Rights Act of 1961, Land Titles Adjustment Act of 1993, and Distribution and Transfer of Certain State Land Act of 1993, Provision of Land and Assistance Act of 1993, KwaZulu-Natal Ngonyama Trust Act of 1994, Ordinance and Proclamations. Honorable Chairperson and members, after 1994, the democratic government enacted several pieces of legislation to redress inequality in land ownership as follows: Restitution of Land Rights Act 22 of 1994, Land Administration Act of 1995, Land Reform Act of 1996, Communal Property Association Act 28 of 1996, Interim Protection of Informal Lands Right Act 31 of 1996, and Land Survey and all other pieces of legislation. Communal Framed and Communal Land Rights Act as legislation that would help people secure their land rights. The law was enacted in 2004. However, as many rural people argued, the CLARA in effect would have undermined their security of land tenure because it gave traditional councils wide-ranging powers, including control over the occupation, use and administration of communal land. It therefore bypassed all other forms and levels of authority related to land, elected and customary. After a lot of opposition from rural people, the Constitutional Court struck down the CLARA in its entirety in 2010. It should be noted, Chair, that our country has a dual land administration system. Secure tenure system is supported by CARAS, and insecure tenure system is largely administered by traditional leaders, where land is either registered in the name of the state or remains unregistered and the state is considered to be the legal owner. The insecure tenure system is characterized by unregistered land tenure rights that is protected by Interim Protection of Informal Land Rights Act. The right holders are either issued with permission to occupy, leases, receipt of some of the rights are not documented. Land ownership in the Eastern Cape will still demonstrate that most of the land is in the hands of the whites as shown below. 40% is owned by whites, 28% is communal, 12% is owned by Coloureds and Indians, 7% is state-owned, 7% is municipal land, 6% is owned by blacks. The Department of Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Reform is stating that although communal land is either registered in the name of the state or is deemed as unregistered state land, it is not actually state land, and as such, communal land will play no part in land redistribution, but will rather be transferred to the people who live on it. The department is developing policy and legislation in line with the recommendations of the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform and Agriculture, adopted by Cabinet in December 2019. This will clarify the government's position and provide the necessary institutional framework for future administration of communal land. Relevant stakeholders, including traditional leaders, will participate in the process. The extent of informal land tenure rights tends to be contested and are sometimes vulnerable to confiscation on the basis of lack of use. There are households that bought land in freehold but were prohibited from taking ownership. Hence, it was registered in the name of a holder of a public office in trust of a tribe instead of such household. The informal or off-registered land tenure rights deprive the holders of such rights opportunities to participate in the economy and hamper effective land administration. The majority of rural and urban communities that live in informal settlements, backyards, inner city buildings, whose occupation is sometimes unlawful or insecure. This existing tenure rights issued in terms of legislation that is.
As you conclude, Honorable Member.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as in conclusion, Honorable Chairperson, all of us need to work hard to ensure that the above become a reality. In our quest to make it a reality, we need courage and determination. As an African Titan, Kwame Nkrumah once wrote, open quotes, countrymen, the task ahead is great indeed, and heavy is the responsibility.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
And yet it is a noble and glorious challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson.
Thanks very much, Honorable Member. The next speaker is Honorable L. Maile, Gauteng MEC, Infrastructure and Human Settlement. Honorable Maile.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson, honorable delegates to the NCOP, honorable members, colleagues, and comrades. In the introduction to Cedric Nunn's book, Unsettled 100 Years War of Resistance by Xhosa against Boer and British, Zaid Simda makes the following comment about the historical relationship between the African majority and communal land ownership, which is profoundly germane to us as we debate this important of topics today. And I quote, "These landscapes are storage places of memory embedded in these rocks, these dongas, these trees, these hills, these rivers, these valleys, these ruins, these monuments, these cities. These cairns are generations of narratives that continue to haunt the present," and I close quote. Needless to say, the question of land disposition and land ownership for the African majority is one that has still not been adequately addressed, despite the expropriation bill having been recently adopted by the National Assembly. Tenure reform remains an existential necessity in order to address the historical injustice. to use a phrase from famous speech by former President Thabo Mbeki. This is crucial so that we can secure the land rights of the Black majority, specifically when it comes to the offering different options for collective landholding, where tenure options are often limited to communal property associations and trusts as things stand. The question remains whether these two options are the most effective institutional arrangements, and in order to give communities security of tenure. It remains common cause that insecurity of land tenure remains a serious problem for most communities, even as they may be experiencing de facto security of tenure on a daily basis. This lack of legal certainty pertaining to security land rights for communities remains a bottleneck towards attracting investment and stimulating economic activity that has benefit for local communities in rural areas. The challenge remains before us to democratize land and tenure rights for communities in line with constitutional principles in a manner that will empower rural communities to take charge and be in control of their own developmental trajectory, in line with our stated aim as a people's government of giving power back to the people and in all things putting people first. Recent cases, such as the one in Tolobeni in the Eastern Cape, give us relevant example of the dire need for jurisprudence that puts communities first on issues of land tenure, even as we pursue a developmental agenda that can often conflict with immediate community interests and aspirations. Of course, these are some of the growing pains of building a modern state with a progressive constitution that considers common law and customary as complementary and equal sources of our jurisprudence. Even as we promulgate the communal land tenure bill, we must ask ourselves certain questions about the impact and consequential nature, both intended and unintended, of this bill. Are we eradicating the dualistic apartheid land tenure system in doing so? Are we giving communities sufficient varied tenure options in promulgating this bill? Are the principles that underpin the bill in line with constitutional principles of equality, human rights, both individual and group rights, and of course, democracy? These are but a few of the things to consider as we debate this important of subjects for the health and well-being of our nation state, and ultimately what we must be able to consider for ourselves as we seek to advance the rights of communities to land ownership and security of tenure. Is the question whether this is all in line with our mantra of Matla ke batho, amandla ngabantu, and consistent with the Batho principle of governance, and that we have embraced as a progressive government or of revolutionary democrats. I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Madam Chair of the session. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Honorable Maile. Honorable members, I would like now to recognize Honorable W. Ocamp, GA.
Honorable House Chairperson, members of this House, people of South Africa, when we talk about land reform, many people mistakenly think that we are only talking about agricultural land. It is, however, important to note that not everybody in South Africa wants to be a farmer. There are people that want to be doctors, teachers, some people want to be mechanics, other people want to be lawyers. Don't know why, but they do. The fact is that the one thing that all South Africans have got in common, Honorable House Chairperson, is that they do want to own the land that they live on. Rural development and land reform is arguably one of the most sensitive topics in our country, and if it is not handled correctly, it will have dire and long-lasting consequences for everyone in South Africa. The vision statement of the Ministry of Agriculture, Rural Development and Land Reform states that it wants vibrant, equitable and sustainable rural communities. Honorable House Chairperson, how can this be achieved when millions of hectares of land are still owned by the state instead of it being owned by the people who live and work on those areas? It is a shame that 28 years since the advent of democracy, those land areas are still in the name of the state and does not belong to the people that live on it. Successive ANC governments have promised to address the issue of land ownership in communal areas, but they have failed dismally to follow through on their promises. The problem with land reform is not the constitution, nor is it the unwillingness of farmers to assist in making land reform a success. It is the corruption and poor governance inside the ANC that stands in the way of the successful implementation of land reform. Honorable House Chairperson, it is not only me and the DA that say this. This statement was also supported by the NDP, as well as the high-level panel under the leadership of former President Kgalema Motlanthe, which stated that the Constitution was not the reason for the failure of land reform, but that the failures was due to poor implementation of policy, corruption, and a lack of urgency by this government. Now, Honorable House Chairperson, that is evident again today. In this debate, we do not have one member of cabinet taking part in this debate. Not one minister is here. They don't even attend this debate. Not one deputy minister is here. When the MEC of the Eastern Cape, Honorable Peters, addressed us, she did it from her car. How serious are the ANC to address these issues if this is the urgency with which they handle this? Due to this failure by the various ANC governments, the Democratic Alliance will shortly introduce the Land Justice Bill. This new private members bill will be groundbreaking because it will empower the estimated 16 million people living on trust and state-owned land, as well as land reform beneficiaries, to decide for themselves if they would personally want ownership of the land they live on. This bill of the Democratic Alliance will, for the first time in the history of a democratic South Africa, enable at least 16 million people to truly get the most out of the land due to the fact that they will now own the land instead of being mere occupants thereof. To give an example, Honorable House Chair, of the potential that can be unearthed if one owns your property, we can look at what most commercial farmers do with their property. They give it as security in order to borrow money to invest in their property. They do capital investments in order to get better harvest on the land and to improve the herd's quality and quantities. A lot of homeowners use their homes as security for loans to do improvements on their homes. One of the problems that all these people that live and work on communal land have is that they cannot use that land as security in order to obtain capital to do improvements on that land. These land occupants are furthermore very reluctant to do capital investments on the state-owned land because very few people will do improvements and put money into something that does not belong to them and they do not own. This bill of the DA will enable people currently living on communal land to do improvements on their farms and homes with the knowledge that they are not improving the property that does not belong to them, but that they are improving their own property and thus increasing the value of their personal estates, which they can in the future pass on to their children. This bill of the DA will also assure that the right of individuals to own their land will not affect any cultural rights and associations that these individuals want to exercise in their communities. Land does not have to belong to a trust or to the state in order for the people who live on that land to form part of their cultural and traditional structures. The Honorable Mtetwa gave a lot of figures. He reminded me of our former President, Jacob Zuma, when he gave his figures. But in listening to all the figures that you gave, it is important to note that A land audit must be done with urgency. There are no reliable figures reflecting the true state of land ownership in South Africa. Perception and emotions, rather than fact, drove policy formulation for far too long, and without a reliable land audit, it will continue to do so. Instead of changing our constitution to allow for the expropriation of commercial land and other properties without compensation, it is time to turn land holders who still live on land owned by the state into private land owners. Again, land holders must be turned into land owners. By stopping to treat people on communal and state-owned land as second-class citizens without the right to own the land they live on, we will improve food security, lower the unemployment rate and malnutrition figures, and at the same time create a sense of pride and humanity for these new landowners. The private members' bill that the DA is proposing in this regard will therefore create a win-win situation and will be a great step forward in the history of democratic South Africa. I thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Honorable Member. The next speaker is Honorable M. Dlamini. Honorable Dlamini.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, the debate about land in its multiple manifestations is not merely about land as a physical entity, but it is about the reconstruction of society, about rethinking power and how power is held, by whom and for what purposes. Which is why the economic freedom fighters, we have since inception been clear on what needs to be done regarding land holding created by the colonial dispossession and apartheid. The EFF's approach to land is that all land should be transferred to the ownership and custodianship of the state. The state should, through its legislative capacity, transfer all land to the state, which will administer and use land for sustainable development purposes. The transfer should happen without compensation and should apply to all South Africans. Reclaiming South African land is central to the EFF in empowering Black South Africans, and this is a task which can only be achieved through the expropriation of land without compensation. We have in the past made calls for the review and amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution to make it possible for the state to expropriate land in the public interest without compensation. As millions of our people live in frustration at the slow pace of land reform, with farm workers still being victims of legal and illegal evictions, by farm owners and their desperation for land they call their own. Yet today, there are those who argue that private titling of land is the cornerstone of democracy, and that amendments that seek to undermine private ownership of land would violate the principle of constitutionalism. This claim is nonsensical, and we should dismiss it, as the idea of private titling of land is an ideological one, not a constitutional principle. Tenure to land can be secured and even be transferable through a proper system of recordable land use rights and registration. This does not have to be in the form of title deeds. The idea also that a freehold system of land tenure is necessary requisite for development and investment is also not anything new. In South Africa, privatization of land has long achieved its inevitable consequences. The vast majority of land is in the hands of a few. Social relations have been disequilibrated, and access to and control of property is subject to litigation processes. We know this for the true, as in the year 1993, there were about 58,000 commercial farmers in the country, and this was reduced to 45,800 in 2002 and 39,000 by 2007. Reasons for decline being a number of reasons, main one being the buying off of smaller farms by larger, more capitalized farms. Chairperson, we have a situation of unprecedented privatization of land in this country, which is largely powered by racism. And it is also the reason why South Africans remain the most unequal society in the world. Our people have been waiting for years to have their land restored, and the ruling party has failed to ensure that there's a thorough and a resolution on the land question. Power and liberation does not exist for our people without ownership of property. Political power has not translated to economic power. The ANC has not led the country into a rise to economic equality for Black South Africans. Socio-economic redress is needed for Black South Africans who have been systematically oppressed for generations in their own country. The idea of being able to claim land without ownership ought to be challenged, for it does not make sense for Black people who are in the majority in this country to not only live in, but protected and care for spaces owned by the white man. We therefore call on South Africans to know that they must stop putting their trust in the ANC, for the ruling party has demonstrated before they can do nothing to give them the land back. It is only through the EFF where our people can reclaim what was stolen from them. Ours remains and will never change. Expropriation of land without compensation for equal redistribution, for we want the state to be the custodian of the land. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Honorable Member. The next speaker is Honorable Nsube.
No, thanks.
Order.
Thanks, Honorable House Chair of the Council. It is quite refreshing to be here, Chair. And let us welcome Honorable Jankelson to the NCOP and say that Honorable Jankelson, all of us must appreciate and understand that the project of neocolonialism is still alive in Africa and all other parts of the world, particularly on the progressive forces. So the issue of the land, particularly you mentioned Venezuela and Zimbabwe, it's not about the policy position, it's about the imperialists using the economic force to disadvantage those countries. It's like in Cuba, we know now that economic embargo was voted, but America used its economic strength to outvote it. So that is what we wanted to pass the chair. Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. The DA has called a debate on the complete ownership and the title deed to land reform beneficiaries, as well as those living on a trust land within the communal areas. While this may appear as a noble endeavor and something worthy of support in form of substance of the DA call requires a closer scrutiny as it entrenches apartheid relations in forms and in guise. Complete ownership and title deeds are important for the development of an asset base for those who were deprived of the land and the property under the apartheid regime. It is the ANC government which unfolded a program for the development of housing in the urban areas and reducing informal settlement, as well as the development of a land reforms programs in rural areas. This program has been holistic as it sought development of settlement programs based on the infrastructure development in order that the majority of first-time homeowners do not receive a devalued asset. In the rural areas, the ANC has sought to ensure that the land reform includes creation of small and medium farms, which increases food security, creates employment and economic development. Again, the ANC has a holistic approach to land reform and land ownership in the country for those who require the correction of the historical injustice of apartheid era through economic exclusion. It is holistic as it seeks to
as it seeks not only restitution and security of tenure, but also seeks to consummate an inclusive economic development against the backdrop of apartheid economic exclusion of the Black majority from participation. Moreover, Chairperson, the problem with the narrow focus of the DA on a complete ownership and title deeds is that it does not seek to negate apartheid special planning, and therefore the value of title deeds without concomitant services to ensure a decent standard of living is devalued. So let us rather spend time on this debate. I hear. Okay. So let us rather spend time in this debate. Am I protected, Chair? So let us rather spend time in this debate on a value-added ownership and title deed rather than one which entrenches inequality, unemployment, and historical exclusion. Over a number of years, the South African economy has experienced low levels of growth, and this was compounded by the COVID-19. This had a negative impact on increasing level of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. The land reform is a fundamental part of the transformational program of the ANC government. It has important political, economic, and social implications in a country like South Africa. The historical injustice of the past was exercised through the land deprivation of the majority of the people in this country, with the land tenure only possible through the former homelands. This impacted negatively on the economic development of the majority of the people in the country and forced the people of the land to become part of the cheap labor system. This had a disruptive social effect on the family structures and the family life of the majority of our people. Deprivation of the land simultaneously meant deprivation of the political rights, Chairperson. Therefore, the correction of the historical injustices of apartheid through the land reform program is a critical transformation of the South African society. The lack of economic activity and land reform in an outflow of people from rural areas into urban areas seeking better economic prospects. Land reform is a critical component to accelerate inclusive economic growth and development. It has a potential to increase economic productivity in the rural sector and food security in our country. This will have the effect of boosting economic growth and lowering unemployment in our country. It empowers people and communities within microeconomy where jobs are created and need to be created. It also builds the local economy and allows the development of other services which are related to the development of small and medium holding farms. This kind of microeconomic development prevents pressure from the rural areas to the urban areas with the concomitant pressure on social services. Access to the land by smallholders and subsistence farmers is not just a simple issue of title deeds, but ensuring that there's a sufficient support of structures to ensure the success of the development of this project. The first critical issue is to ensure that there is a low-cost funding available for the development of small and medium farms, which does not reinforce debt in projects that may not necessarily realize a profit in the first financial year after a startup. Whilst the title deeds allows the collateral to raise funding, this enabling for functional and existing farmers for further development and does not assist emerging farmers which require financial support. The blended financial model for the funding for the development of emerging farmers does not assist, as it is difficult to access by emerging farmers and have conditions which emerging farmers find difficult to fulfill. Chairperson, it is imperative that the building asset base of South African citizens occurs as it will ensure a reduction in inequality, and this can only occur through the land ownership in both urban and rural areas. But for this to have economic value and meaning, it must not be viewed in isolation of the overall development required for the land reform and special development. Emerging farmers and residential settlement in urban areas also require infrastructure development, as it's critical for the development of vibrant small and medium scale farming sector and functioning of urban communities. This in terms of water and electricity, as farming and urban settlements are dependent on these two important inputs for its success. Moreover, Chair, in a technological economy, it is imperative that telecommunication exists in those areas. Therefore, the land reform program has important dependencies for its success. The ANC government is not intending to engage in a land reform to create dumping grounds for the people as it was in the apartheid era. The development of government of dams in different parts of the country and the development of water infrastructure by municipalities is a critical part of ensuring that small and medium farm scale farming can succeed, Chair. In urban areas, water supply ensures a dignified and modern level existence and improves quality of life of people. Whilst farming is a labor-intensive activity, it also requires electricity for its success, as produce which are harvested are required to be kept afresh for the market. The development of urban settlement requires adequate electricity supply of modern living. Therefore, it is critical that the spatial development through land development program is coupled with infrastructure, which will enhance the value of the land program. It is imperative small and medium scale emerging farmers have access to the transport infrastructure in all forms of rail and road access to domestic and export markets, and therefore it is important that the infrastructure development under the economic reconstruction and recovery plan occurs as it will provide a positive impetus for the success of the land reform program. Therefore, the urban settlement developed for blacks far away from employment opportunities, which resulted in higher cost of black workers whose labor was already premised on a cheap labor system. This was a global anomaly, as international most working and middle class people based in urban areas are located in areas close to the employment, with rich occupying the suburbs in outer urban areas. Apartheid spatial planning still exists in urban South Africa, and therefore the development of Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act, which seeks to ensure integrated spatial planning urban sector which benefit communities. This development is coupled with emphasis of microeconomic development through district development model in both urban and rural areas. This means the development of special economic zone and industrial parks in the areas and agri parks and agri villages. This will allow, Chairperson, for the development of both rural and urban industrialization and manufacturing to occur near the settlement areas or small and medium scale farms. This legislation will fundamentally change the face of our rural township communities, as it is based on the integrated development. Therefore, it is incorrect to view the development of small and medium farmers or new urban settlement through the land reform program purely through the lens of a title deed and issues associated with communal land tenure. Rather, the ownership and creating asset base which possesses economic value is more important rather than just ensuring a title deed which becomes part of the asset base of financial institution through the home loan book and farms loans rather than people's ownership. The DA, Chairperson, in its so-called intention to seek to entrench apartheid social relations in new forms, such as ensuring that title deeds without a company value. International example abound about that the land reform can and should become engine of local economic of local economic growth and job opportunities. In conclusion, Chairperson, the ANC is committed to land reform, ownership, and title deeds, but not in poverty, inequality, unemployment, and historical and economical exclusion of our people. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Honorable Ntube. Honorable members, I would now like to call Honorable Mbaga, DA.
Masibulele ngethuba. Honorable House Chair, honorable members, fellow South Africans, good day. It is quite sad that we don't have anyone from the ministry to take part in this debate, which we think is central to the development of this country. Probably that is not seen by our ministry. The Democratic Alliance supports a land reform process that, among other things, achieves redress in rural communities, which promotes economic inclusion to lift rural people out of poverty and supports growth and prosperity in the agricultural sector. Many South Africans live on land that they do not own, and about 16 million people are looking up to government to give them land and empower them. One of the key outputs when one considers the issue of land ownership is food security, which would be alleviated significantly if the land question would be resolved. One of the issues that inhibits development is the lack of clarity about the status of land rights in communal areas. These are characterized by severe poverty, overcrowding, and isolation from economic growth and opportunity. Section 25, subsection 6 of the Constitution states that a person or community whose tenure of land is legally insecure as a result of past racially discriminatory laws or practices is entitled to the extent provided by an act of parliament, either to tenure which is legally secure or to comparable redress. This forms the basis for which the DA intends to go to South African Human Rights Commission to lay a complaint over the failure to accede to the law and the Constitution. The Department of Public Works and Infrastructure decided to evict farm occupants who were making a living on their own. Instead of following the correct route, we have noted with dismay how Nonge Botani Agricultural Primary Cooperative from Hopefield Farm in the Eastern Cape were evicted from the state-owned farmland they had occupied for almost 2 decades. They lost their livestock, grain, equipment, and ultimately their livelihoods. This all happened in the height of COVID-19. The ANC government does not care for the people. Poverty and hunger induce the rural poor to deplete land and forest resources. If landlessness is not corrected, the rural poor are likely to remain poor for almost all the whole of their lives, to pass on their poverty to the children and grandchildren, and to die of easily preventable diseases. The single biggest step forward for sustainable land reform would be to provide title and ownership to the 16 million people living on trust land. It is unacceptable that the poorest people in our country still do not enjoy equal rights to property ownership. Instead of plunging our country into chaos through expropriation without compensation, empowering people in communal areas will ensure justice, dignity, and economic development. Agri-BEE is also supposed to support farmers to purchase stakes in the agricultural value chain. This may succeed to some, but to many South Africans, it is not succeeding at all. Like with all BEE projects of this government, only a select few are empowered. Blended finance between land and government also failed to deliver the positive results. Hotgrow walked away from this agreement. Hotgrow brought on board a commercial bank because the land bank was failing to support land reform and the frustration that they were going through in assessing and approving deals. The poor status of land bank with its lack of capital and the risk appetite to support Black farmers has led to many farmers not being able to receive land reform support. In our current economic order, when no one is keen to create unskilled jobs, access to land for livelihoods and work, and simply as part of the social safety net is vitally important. Poor people need land, but poor people do not feature in our government's land reform plans. Instead of providing equitable access to the many millions of rands are spent on glamorous and impractical vanity projects for the few, land reform must be part of a meaningful local economic development plans that can help the poor and diminish inequality. If we want to embark on massive land redistribution responsibly to create jobs and reduce poverty, we need a functioning government, and that is what we as a country do not have at the moment. We must shift the focus of land reform from meeting targets to meeting needs. The land reform program must look beyond rural land and truly address the land needs of South Africans who have historically been excluded from land and property ownership, including the need for access to urban land and housing opportunities. We need comprehensive data on land reform projects that will allow for the identification of common failures that must be addressed and the duplication of models that have been successful. Stakeholders in the private sector and civil society can make an invaluable contribution to the success of land reform, and government departments must actively pursue partnerships and collaboration to achieve shared goals. 28 years after transition to democracy and commencement of land reform, there is a great deal of lived experience to reflect upon and rich literature to draw on. Access to land through redistribution programs is not just a right, but the state must take reasonable measures within its available resources to foster conditions enabling equitable access to land. I thank you, House Chairperson.
Thanks very much, Honorable Member. Honorable Members, Siakuba, I would like to recognize Honorable DeBrain.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. House Chair, Nelson Mandela said in 1995, and I quote, "With freedom and democracy came the restoration of the right to land," unquote. Now, Chair, 28 years later, the right to land is still no better off than it was in 1994. And the reason for this, in short, is the ANC government. South Africa's land reform program has suffered many failures, and the beneficiaries have, in many cases, seen little or no improvement in their livelihoods. Vir 4 dekades word leebeloftes en vals hoop van grondeienaarskap soos 'n wortel voor die neus van die armes gehang om vir die ANC steun te werf. En vir dekades lang word die armes van Suid-Afrika vol hoop vir 'n beter toekoms en beter lewe misleiding van die ANC geglo. Grondhervorming kon 'n middel van nasiebou, versoening en ekonomiese welvaart gewees het, sou dit billik en regverdig toegepas word. Maar die ANC het eerder verkiesing om rasseverdeeldheid te skep met die wyse waarop die grondkwessie benader en bestuur word. En die skokkende hiervan, agbare voorsitter, is die feit dat die meeste mense wat hierdeur benadeel word, arm burgers is en in die meeste gevalle ANC kiesers is. Enige logiese mens of instansie kan tot vir homself indink dat 'n blote plakkie aarde alleen nie rykdom kan verseker nie. Grond moet bewerk word om 'n wins te kan wys. En stedelike eiendom moet ontwikkel word om van waarde te kan wees. En om dit te doen kos geld, voorsitter. Geld wat bitter min mense in Suid-Afrika in sy agtersak mee rondloop. Om grond landelik of stedelik te ontwikkel, het jy sekuriteit nodig om fondse te kan bekom. En sonder 'n titelakte vir jou grond is daar geen sekuriteit nie. Dus is daar ook geen fondse nie. En hierdie is die kringloop waarin duisende begunstigdes van grondhervorming self bevind, sonder enige hulp of bystand vanaf die regering wat enigstens van waarde is. Honorable Chair, since the beginning of land reform, the beneficiaries of land reform should have received title deeds in order to empower them to successfully and sustainably utilize the land they received. But instead, it was a setup for failure, and the only ones who benefited from land reform is the political parties that abused the hope of the poor to gain support, only to abuse that same support again when elected. House Chair, giving people land and still depriving them of ownership of that land is regressive. And as much as land reform is justified by some, it is self-defeating for the government to dump people on land without sufficient or relevant support and title deeds. Agbare voorsitter, as die ANC werklik ernstig is oor die bemagtiging van almal in Suid-Afrika wat grondhervorming kan bied, sal hy verseker het dat die begunstigdes hiervan 'n realistiese kans gegee word. Hy sal verseker het dat die begunstigdes van grondhervorming en sekuriteit in terme van eienaarskap het om homself volhoubaar te kan onderhou en by te kon dra tot voedselsekerheid in die land. En hy sal verseker het dat die mense van Suid-Afrika die vrugte hiervan sou kon pluk en nie net die regerende ANC nie. Dankie.
Thanks very much, honorable member. Honorable members, I would like now to recognize Honorable BP Shiba Mpumalanga MEC, Agriculture, Rural Development, Land and Environment Affairs.
Thank you very much, Honorable House Chairperson. Let me greet you as well as the Deputy Chairperson, Ms. Sylvia Lucas. Honorable members, MECs present, Sanbonani. In direct response to the segregationist law passed by the Union of South Africa in 1913, the Natives Land Act, the democratic dispensation led the Republic's first democratic president, Dr. Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, formulated the RDP policy. The RDP policy on land set the goal of redistributing 30% of the farmland taken brutally from our people within the first 5 years of the dispensation in 1999. The Natives Land Act of 1913 confined the majority of the natives into 13% of South Africa's total land, whilst reserving 87% of the land for the white Europeans minority. In the process of this mass land theft legalized by the Natives Land Act, not only did our people leave their livelihood, but also lost their property in terms of cattle, which were either forcefully taken or taken from our people in lieu of useless bracelets, despite their protestation, in particular by the Khoi community in the Western Cape. Honorable House Chair, the redistribution process under the democratic dispensation faced a severe headwinds of opposition, as evidenced in the unreasonable and unaffordable market prices, which were asked for by the sellers, in addition to the not so successful willing seller, willing buyer policy. It is therefore correct that the president, when handing over the title deeds to 50 households of Ebenezer Beeswater in the Western Cape in 2019, when he said, I quote, "It is in the ownership of land that we find ourselves independent as a people. It is land that we rely on to live, to work, and to eat. It is land that holds firmly the roots of our ancestors. Land is the one thing that endures the passage of time," close quote. Whereas government, through the commissions of restitution of land claims, has made significant advance in restoring land to significant masses of our people. We equally acknowledge that there is still more for us to do. It is also apt to this stage to recall the ultimate advice of our former President Mandela, that after climbing one hill, you discover there is more hills to climb. The current situation is not good, and unfortunately, it cannot be left unattended. As stated in the ANC land reform policy document, the evidence from reported and unreported cases of evictions, land invasion, irregular land uses, and other activities are an indication that majority of South Africans continue to be landless or with insecure land rights. In Mpumalanga, for example, eviction of farm dwellers and labor tenants is the order of the day. This committee is aware of the plight of the people who are facing evictions from mining houses and farmers, mainly in Hartsebande and Kangala district. People are evicted from farms where they have been living in for many decades. And the unfortunate part of this is that they are not only removed from the residential and livelihood land, but they are also deprived of the access to their graves of their people. In some cases, Honorable House Chair, this committee had in the past the stories of farmers removing remains to bury them in mass graves without following legal processes for grave relocation. Extreme cases are where people were shot, injured, or killed. It is an empirical fact, Chair, that any other intervention to these challenges that we are talking about has failed, and therefore the only solution is for these people to get a secured tenure which will give them a complete ownership of the land they are living in. It is known that 1/3 of citizens in our country live in communal land areas, of which in majority are the pockets of poverty. Majority of these people have no security of tenure, thus relying on right to occupy documents, which form a receipt of conflicts. Insecure or illegal tenure makes it not possible to make meaningful investment decision or land development. The fact that some of the chief or tribal authorities have in the main embarked on selling and or leasing pieces of land without community consultation and consent reflect the need to secure tenure rights via a title deed. Currently, people with insecure tenure are relying on interim protection of Informal Land Rights Act number 31 of 1996 from losing their rights to land. The piece of legislation remains the main legislative instrument to deal with development decision in the communal areas. We, however, need to review our available different policies that are striving to address the issue of land ownership and security of tenure to allow the country to give land reform beneficiaries complete ownership. This will allow these beneficiaries to use their safely to advance their livelihood. While various forms of official tenures were crafted to institute a property rights for one aspect of the South African society, the African majority had no right to such tenure, and it is our duty to move towards full or complete tenure security. Aluta continua on land rights restoration to the masses of our landless people in our lifetime. Thank you very much, Honorable House Chairperson.
Thanks very much, Honorable Member. Honorable members, I would like now to invite the Deputy Chairperson of the NCOP to take over on Honorable AP van de Weesden. Honorable
Thank
Lucas.
Honorable Chairperson, Honorable van der Westhuizen, can you just allow me to properly accept the chair? So we will now allow you, Honorable van der Westhuizen, to continue the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Lucas. Honorable Chair, the National Development Plan asserts that land reform is necessary to unlock the potential for a dynamic, growing, and employment-creating agricultural sector. Unfortunately, despite South Africa's best efforts with land reform, the end result has most often not been to grow agricultural output, nor to create more employment opportunities. I'm grateful to say that the Western Cape has been able to overcome this trend and to achieve the goals of the National Development Plan. The Western Cape government is committed to making a success of the land reform program, and we continue to provide effective support to land reform beneficiaries through our Department of Agriculture. Our program is fostering redress and equity through land reform. I welcome the opportunity to share some of the innovative approaches of our province with you. Our programs succeed as we value the knowledge and support of existing farmers and commodity organizations. We also value property ownership. For example, we have 11 signed MOUs with industry partners focusing on key value chains in our province. One of the major obstacles for beneficiaries of land reform projects has always been access to markets. The MOUs that we signed with commodity organizations facilitate access to markets and mentorship support by these commodity organizations at no cost to the department nor the farmer, thereby contributing to the commercialization process. Furthermore, it was through the commodity approach that the department was awarded the Jobs Fund project valued at 120 million rand for the commercialization of farmers in the deciduous fruit sector. Through this project, we have added over 300 hectares of fruit for land reform farmers since 2016. The Western Cape is by far the only province that has a proven model for successful land reform and job creation. No wonder that while we have been able to create 71,000 new agricultural jobs since 2012, the total growth in primary agricultural jobs for all 8 remaining provinces come to only 40,234 jobs. Land reform success in the Western Cape is not just a matter of statistics. It represents people that are proud of their own success stories. Numerous of our land reform farmers are already playing big in the economy with the support of the Western Cape government. We have some well-known names in the agricultural economy, such as farmer Andre Kloete, who has mixed farming, mostly fruit, Mr. Ismail Motala, Errol April, also fruit, and numerous others that farm with grain, livestock, rooibos, etc. The list is long. These farmers form part of the 50 commercial farmers that the department had identified since 2017 and that received dedicated support to deepen their commercialization. And their products are sold both locally and in the export markets. You know the old adage, you can only manage what you can measure. The performance of the Western Cape government on land reform was measured during 2 studies in the last decade to gauge the success rate. These studies revealed the success rate of 62% in 2014, with an improvement to 72% success in 2019. This is very important for us, given the reported success rate of only 10% elsewhere. It is important, however, to note that one of the main challenges facing land reform is the availability of funding. International studies have shown for every 1 rand spent on land acquisition, there's a need for 2 rands to be able to provide support. This is unfortunately a challenge. Hence our partnership arrangements with the private sector in the Western Cape to help stretch the limited resources. In our experience, the private sector is a friend of land reform in South Africa. This is amply demonstrated by the following. This is amply demonstrated by the following. The PALS, or Partnership in Agri-Solutions, is an exciting initiative which works towards enabling communities seeking to successfully implement land reform. The collaboration between the Western Cape Department and PALS is an exciting initiative as the department provides PALS with support to roll out PALS projects. Farmers such as Gersman Low and Raymond Koopstad are 2 great examples of the success of the PALS way of land reform. We are excited to note that PALS is now being extended to other provinces. Recently, Hortfin, the blended finance scheme created to facilitate and enable transformation in the fruit, table grape and wine industry's value chain, announced a new partnership with First National Bank. The collaboration between FNB, Hortfin and the Jobs Fund has resulted in an innovative funding structure that includes commercial funding from FNB and patient funding from Hortfin and the Jobs Fund, which has favorable funding terms for emerging farmers. This agreement provides the ability to grant emerging farmers greater access to commercial financing in the agricultural sector. The approach to be followed is to focus on market-led and district-based commodity value chains and corridors. Chairperson, I've highlighted the exceptional contribution of the Western Cape in creating new jobs in the agricultural sector through land reform. Yet we want to do even better. Unfortunately, this requires the National Department of Water and Sanitation to invest in critical projects for water infrastructure in the Western Cape. We believe that the following projects are critical to unlocking opportunities for land reform beneficiaries, and the Western Cape has therefore submitted the following projects for inclusion in the agricultural and agri-processing master plan. First, increasing the water available from the Brandvlei Dam by 33 million cubic meters. This will increase the area under irrigation farming by 4,400 hectares, which will increase the value of agricultural production from 4.2 billion to 7.2 billion. Direct employment from 28,800 to 47,700, and the achievement of 56% of the land reform target in the Langeberg and Breda Valley municipalities. Secondly, increasing from 12 million cubic meters to 23.3 million cubic meters, the water from the Buffeljacht Dam. This will allow irrigation production to increase by 1,852 hectares, which will increase the value of agricultural production by 1.2 billion and create another 2,850 jobs in the area. Thirdly, the raising of the Clan William Dam, which will ensure water allocation, reform, and socio-economic development in the Matsikama and Cederberg municipalities of the West Coast District. Raising the dam by 13 meters will increase the yield of the dam to a total of 169 million cubic meters per year, making water available for the development of more than 6,000 hectares additional irrigation of high-value crops. And the biggest percentage of this water has been allocated to emerging farmers. This project, launched as far back as 2013, has seen serious delays. The project's been repeatedly relaunched, first by Minister Mokonyane and earlier this year by Minister Senzo Mchunu. Traveling on the N7, you will see the construction equipment of the Department of Water and Sanitation, where they've been standing idle for years. The fourth project aims to increase agricultural production in the Little Karoo and surrounding areas to the value of 110 million rand per year, and the creation of another 1,000 additional jobs in the value chain. In addition, a 2,500 hectare increase in the area of high value crops under irrigation. Honorable Speaker, farming depends to a large extent on the weather and particularly rainfall. Droughts are a reality, and climate change will bring changes in this regard, which means that almost all farms need financial support to survive the unfavorable years. In the modern economy, a farmer submits his or her farm to the bank, which then lends money against the value of the farm. This can, however, only be done if you have ownership rights to that farm. New farmers without a property right against which money can be borrowed are in a disadvantaged position and cannot
As you conclude, Honorable Member,
the next season's expenses. Thank you. The transfer of full ownership of land to carefully selected, well-trained and financially supported land reform beneficiaries is the way to go in order to see real redress. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable AP van der Westhuizen. With the next to continue with the debate is the Honorable N. Hadebe.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Chairperson. Land reform and the restitution of land to the people of our country have taken far too long to effect change in the lives of millions who are left destitute and disenfranchised. Section 25 of the Constitution clearly states that no one may be deprived of property except in terms of law of general application, and no law may permit arbitrary deprivation of property. This brings me to the issue of the turnaround time for the issuing of title deeds. Ideally, the deeds office should not take more than 10 days to deliver a title deed to the conveyancer after registration. However, this has not been the case, which has resulted in a backlog of thousands of land claims. The Land Claims Court and its commission have been reported as extremely dysfunctional and vastly under-resourced. This leads me to question why the human resources and finance departments of these entities are not being capacitated to clear backlogs of land claims at a faster rate. It is quite alarming that the ruling party has failed to settle land claims dating as far back as 1998. This has led to the now looming 65 billion rand needed for clearing the thousands of outstanding restitution land claims. This is a failure of the government's own making. If it was not for the revelation as seen in the Zondo Commission of widespread government corruption, the resolution on land claims could not have been resolved by now. Unfortunately, Considering the government's incapacity to manage the current rate of water and electricity collection, we are fearful that the additional land ownership will not be met with a responsible revenue collection by the government for these parcels of land. The revenue collection for this land is vitally important for the development of communities. They should not be left to their own devices, as supporting infrastructure development needs to be rolled out at an equal pace. Public confidence in the government to safely and responsibly administer public funds is at an all-time low, with scandal after scandal affecting our communities at local level. Communities in some cases have resorted to taking matters into their own hands, even though they are rate-paying communities, because they can no longer wait for the government to address the country's electricity, water and road infrastructure needs. I thank you, Honorable Deputy Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Hadebe. We continue and we call on Honorable JJ Lund to continue with the debate.
Dag sê, agbare ondervoorsitter, ek sien u word elke keer toegelaat om na my te kyk die afgelope tyd, so ek waardeer dit opreg. Honorable Deputy Chairperson, I would have said honorable ministers, but we have none here, online or in the House, and honorable members. Before I get to my speech, I do want to say that today is the last plenary that Honorable Seleku is with us. His name was submitted today to the IEC to go to the provincial parliament. So I do think on behalf of the NCOP, we can wish him all the best. And Honorable Mahile, I think you remember the name Honorable Seleku because he warned you that you will get beaten in court with your decision in Tshwane, but you didn't listen. Hey.
You don't know what you're talking about, so don't talk about things you don't know.
Can we get on the
Okay, I'm glad Honorable Mahile
yeah,
is
if you want a debate about Tshwane, let's talk about it. Don't smuggle it.
Order, Honorable Mahile, order, Honorable Lund. You may continue, Honorable Lund, order.
I will continue in the dark, Honorable Deputy Chair. So Honorable Mahile, just to make sure, Honorable Seleku warned you that you're going to get beaten in court, and you were. And then you went and lost an internal election as well. So you're on a losing streak, and yet again today you come and stand here and choose the wrong side of history, Honorable Mahile. You're going to lose the Gauteng government as well, and going to sit in the opposition
Honorable Lund,
benches.
can you address Honorable Mahile through the chairperson? Don't make it a discussion between the two of
you. Honorable Deputy Chairperson, I am sure
He doesn't
Honorable
have a
Mahile
speech,
takes
that's why he's
note
just
of
talking
what is
about
being said. And by his reaction, I'm sure it's landing very close to home and in his heart. Then it's an absolute honor and a pleasure to participate in this debate. And Honorable Jenkinson, I want to thank you for carrying in this critically important debate, but also a very sensitive topic that needs to be addressed. And it's important that we do not shy away from having these difficult conversations that will take our country forward. And Honorable Jenkinson, your participation and constructive inputs, the same as those from Honorable Oukamp, Honorable Bacha, and Honorable Van der Westhuizen, is in stark contrast to those ANC members, and even the Honorable Minister Honorable Didiza, who's not even in the House or online. That shows the absolute disregard and disrespect that she has for such a critically important topic. Honorable Mtetwa, you say that the ANC have a balanced
Honorable
approach.
Lund, I think at this stage, I really must come up for the minister who is not present, but we have explained that unfortunately at the last moment, the president.
Point of order, Chairperson.
I am doing it because it has been said already. We took note, and I
Point of order,
at the end of the
House
debate,
Chairperson.
Point
of order, House Chairperson.
Honorable Oukamp, I am the chairperson. I am determining the order in this house.
Honorable Chairperson, I'm rising on a point of order, please.
The minister is in Egypt accompanying the president. I am explaining to Honorable Lord because I can see it is really important that we must know when we begin to criticize. Honorable
Honourable
Lord, I will allow
Chairperson,
you
I
the
rise
floor.
on a point of order.
And your order is,
Honourable House Chairperson, I rise on a point of order.
and your order is,
I think everybody in this house are very confused at this moment because we've got a House Chairperson sitting in this chair and you are butting in from the side. You are not in the chair at this
Honorable
moment,
Okram,
even though you might be the deputy
if you
chairperson.
were listening, if you were listening, you would
House
have
Chairperson,
known.
are you going
I
to
started
vacate the seat and let her go on, or who is in charge of this
started
house sitting?
presiding since AP van der Westhuizen was debating. I started presiding. And that
Well,
is
we've
what you
got
didn't
somebody in the
notice.
seat in this house, Honourable
No, the
Chairperson,
problem is that
then
we
Honourable
are-
Ngwenya should vacate the seat.
The problem is that you didn't even listen when she gave the
Honourable
presiding over.
Chairperson, we've
So
got two
you make
chairs
sense.
at the moment.
I
We've
am the
got two chairs
chairperson.
at the moment.
I am the. Well, I'm sorry for that. We will allow you the few minutes that is still available and you may continue.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Chair. I'm glad that you pointed it out, that the Honourable Minister is out of the country, but it also shows that not a single member of this bloated cabinet takes this matter serious enough to be here. Not a single member, Deputy Minister of this bloated cabinet takes this matter seriously enough to be online. Not even in the House, just to be online. So that is the disrespect that this cabinet shows to the members of the NCOP and to the South Africans that need to have the legislators take this matter to heart. Honourable Tetwa, you say that the ANC have a balanced approach to land reform. And I have seen your balanced approach. I mean, you're trying to balance between outright theft and corruption through tenderpreneurs. That is the balance that you apply in land reform. And the same way your time was up for your speech because you didn't deliver it well, the same way the ANC's time will be up at the next election because you did not deliver at all. Choices. Every single day, we have choices that we make. Even just starting off by choosing what you will wear. You have choices that you make in life that has a longer impact. And we as members of parliament, we have choices to make that impact the lives of millions of people. Today, we're standing in front of such a choice. And you have the choice to adhere to the constitution that allows you to choose who to associate with, where to live, who to love. That constitution that millions died for. The MPs have a choice to fight for that constitution because millions of South Africa want the choice to own the land they live on. They want the choice to own the land they work on. And that is the job of members of parliament to make sure that we give them that choice and do not take that away from them. Honourable Baga, ANC members, like I said, you have the choice to go the disastrous route of expropriation without compensation, as your red spawn has been advocating since the inception. Honourable Baga said it best. The single biggest step forward for sustainable land reform would be to provide title and ownership to the 16 million people living on trust land. Or at least give them the option and the choice to take that. Thank you, Honourable Deputy Chair. It is therefore unacceptable that the poorest people in our country still do not enjoy equal rights to ownership. And honourable members, you have the choice to continue supporting the current trajectory of the ANC government, or you have the choice to support the DA's Land Justice Bill. You have the power to empower millions of South Africa by giving them a choice to own their own land. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Lund. We will continue and we will now call on the Honorable Z Mkiva to continue with the debate.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Let me take this opportunity to greet you, all the members of this House, as well as the MECs that are here, and all the millions of South Africans that are watching this debate. It is rather very strange that the DA has taken to propose a debate on the issue of the complete ownership and the title deeds. One would not have expected them to want to romanticize the issue of title deeds, because I think the most important thing that should come
Honorable
first.
Kiva, Honorable Kiva, your mic, please.
My microphone is on.
We can hear him on the platform.
Yeah.
We can hear him on the platform, Chairperson. So I don't know, the problem should be in the chambers.
Okay. I was saying that it is rather strange that the DA has proposed a debate on the complete ownership and title deeds. One would not have expected them to want to romanticize the issue of title deeds before the restoration of the land.
Yeah, you should have listened to the debate.
Owners. While the issue of the title deeds is a crucial one for land reform, it is being proposed in a one-sided way, as title deeds are crucial only for land security, but in itself does not constitute restitution and economic development of people and communities. Land reform is critical to ensure inclusive economic development in both the urban and the rural areas. So I'm saying, and I want to underline this point, that the issue of the title deeds cannot be put forward as if it is the only preoccupation of land reform. The starting point is the full restoration of the land that was dispossessed from the African majority brutally by people of European origin. And where we stand, the Democratic Alliance is still an organ and a remnant of an apartheid strata, and it represents the interests of those who want to maintain the status quo insofar as the land ownership in South Africa, and we should reject its posture with the scorn that it deserves. This is not dissimilar to the DA handing out the title deeds in a piecemeal manner after the African people have been paying for those homes over many years, many times over the value of the development of those homes. Complete ownership and title deeds, which DA has been granting, have come to the African majority too little, too late. What do I mean by this? In simple terms, it is the African National Congress government that has embarked on a program to ensure that South Africans are not only afforded quality and affordable housing, but they get to have ownership of their land and property. And just to inform you that the people in the rural areas who constitute a significant percentage of the population of this country that represents the African majority, they are not so much worried about the issue of title deed, because the homes that they live in, they are not bonded homes, they are not mortgaged. They own them, they have built them with their own sweat and energy and their own resources. And therefore they don't owe any financial institution. And we think you are trying to trick the majority of our people so that they can get mortgaged in the final analysis. The apartheid government built houses as some kind of compounds for labor reserves in the black townships and made made Africans to pay rent for such houses. So when rolling out title deeds, it must be done against the backdrop of knowledge of our history and that the Africans have already paid their houses through sweat and blood. It is critical that there is focus on more than just complete ownership in a narrower sense of the word, and that is through the title deeds. The ANC has committed itself to accelerate the transfer of title deeds to the rightful owners as part of the rapid release program that makes parcels of land available for those who want to build houses for themselves. Furthermore, The ANC is committed towards ensuring the security of tenure through adequate recognition and protection of the rights of the long-term occupiers, women, youth, and labor tenants under the communal land tenure system. Honorable Lindiwe Pipi spoke about this in detail and in a very, very progressive and a constructive manner. Since 1994, the ANC has built over 3.2 million houses, something that the apartheid government had failed to do for the African majority, even during the height of the country's economic boom under apartheid capitalism. The backlog in terms of issuing the title deeds to the beneficiaries is being attended to with urgency. We, on our part, wouldn't like to see a regression in terms of transforming the skewed land ownership patterns and urge our citizens not to sell these title deeds to other third parties. And we know that you are lining up, you are advocating the issuance of these title deeds so that you can have an opportunity of standing on the other side of the counter and be ready to push money in order to sell the very same properties that you seem to be advocating that our people must own. Land reform is a critical tool for economic development, and it is important that there is an appreciation of the fact that many Asian tigers developed on the basis of land reform and rural economic development. For us, in the ANC, we will keep emphasizing that our land reform is about redressing historical injustices and dispossession of the African majority. That is also a vital opportunity to unlock growth and promote socio-economic transformation, and that it provides a sustainable but radical way of addressing the land question, and that we will use it to build productive assets for our people, unlock agricultural productivity, secure food security, and address the persisting reality of apartheid spatial separation. The DA does not even have a policy on the land reform, save one line sentence which talks to complete ownership and title deeds. That is the only thing that they know, because they know for a fact that they want to protect the land that remains in the hands of the few who are a minority in our country at the expense of the majority of this country. Such a people who behave as if they don't have conscience, that they don't see.
You can heckle, but not so loud.
Honorable Deputy Chairperson,
Not so loud. You cannot drown the speaker.
would the speaker take a question, please?
You can
No, I'm
ask
not
the
going to take a question. We are discussing a
speaker is not
question
taking
that
the
we have
question.
already put.
You can
in
heckle,
front
but
of
don't
the
drown the speaker. Continue, Honorable Nkiva. Banana order.
Papa, sidilishana nabantu abangenanhloni mhlali ngaphambili abayaziyo into okokubana yinkqubo yongqondo gqwirha eyenza into yobana kohluthwe umhlaba kwisininzi sabanini beli lizwe. Kunamhlanje nje umhlaba usesezandleni zegcuntswana. Umhlaba usesezandleni zegcuntswana. Sithi sifuna ukulungisa loo nto ngendlela echubekileyo ezawuqinisekisa into yobana kuhlala kukho uzinzo, kuhlala kukho imveliso kwicala lento okokubana kube kukutya, ikati ingalali eziko. Sililizwe apho thina siphila ngendlela engeyiyo, apho abantu abambalwa bahleli xazalala phezu komhlaba omninzi bayingundanisele abantu abasisininzi emhlabeni omncinci. Eyona nto siyithethayo sithi inkululeko eyiyo yeyokuqinisekisa into okokubana lo mhlaba ubuyele ebantwini ngendlela esemthethweni, kwaye siqinisekise into yokubana bonke abantu beli lizwe bafumana ukufikelela nokwabelana ngomhlaba ngendlela eyiyo, hayi le nto yenziwa ngala maqhwili asachaphileyo lilifa lengcinezelo elabanika igunya besebenzisa isibhamu nayo yonke into ekhohlakeleyo ekuthatheni umhlaba ebantwini bakokwethu. The centrality of land reform is critical to growing our economy and creation of job opportunities for all. And therefore, land restitution is the first process to ensure redress of the colonial and apartheid injustices. And that land reform occurs within this historical context within our own country. Our land reform program is designed to promote rural economic development. The development of rural infrastructure is critical to the industrialization of rural economy with potential growth in the agricultural processes, value chain industries. Land reform cannot occur in isolation in the form of ownership and title deeds without appropriate infrastructure to boost rural economy and ensure food security for our country. The COVID-19 pandemic and the conflict between Russia and its neighbor Ukraine clearly indicates the social and economic value for the need for increased food security, as under those conditions being dependent on other countries for food imports impacts on availability and results in higher prices, which increase the cost of living for our people. This means the development of water, electricity, and transport infrastructure to ensure the economic success of the rural land reform, which are intended to create small and medium farms. Water and electricity are critical inputs for ensuring the development of the rural economy, as this will ensure the success of the land reform in rural areas and ensure that there is an increase in food production in the whole country. Food security will enable the pricing of food not on an import parity pricing basis, but rather on a cost plus basis, which will enable the domestic market to set prices on a cost plus basis, thereby keeping the cost very down. Therefore, it is imperative that there is a development of transport infrastructure in terms of rail and road, which links the different markets and enables rural production to reach both the domestic and export markets. In the past, the apartheid regime utilized the rail system to keep the country in a transport neutral position. This enabled industrialization to occur throughout the country and avoid market concentration and develop in only certain parts of the country, as it gave access to markets on equivalent rail tariffs. The ANC government has resolved on the movement of goods and freight from road to rail, and therefore government is restoring rail infrastructure as part of the economic reconstruction and development plan. The same applies to increasing water supply and electricity generation capacity through IPPs and other forms of clean energy. South Africa has historically been faced with the challenges of poverty, inequality, unemployment, and historic economic exclusion, and therefore creating food security through land reform by creating small and medium farms is geared towards reducing poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Chairperson, in conclusion, the opposition develops pedestrian views on the issue of ownership through title deeds as being the essence of land reform. The choice that they are talking about, they are making, it is not our first choice, and it is also not our fundamental choice. Our fundamental choice is for the land to be returned to its rightful owners. The restoration of land is a key factor, and people must not use it as a weapon to play politics and play around and try to deflect us from the real issue by placing the issue of title deeds and ownership as if it is the main thrust of what we went to struggle for. Please, if the DA want to address the issue of land in South Africa, they must start off by encouraging those individuals who are standing on huge tracts of land and they're doing nothing about that. And all we need is for that land to be returned. And therefore, the issue of the return of land is the priority to ensure that we get the country to move forward and ensure that there's stability, not only now, but for the future. Because sticking to land ownership that is only concentrated to the minority, you are trapping the country into an instability and a civil war that can break out as a result of the young people who are frustrated with the economic trajectory, which is based on land ownership that is in few white hands. I therefore wish to say, Chairperson, I thank you. This results in the opposition not having a holistic economic and developmental perspective on land reform as positively also contributing in inclusive economic development. It is hard to understand why the opposition does not seek to want to grow the domestic market and the buying power of the majority of the population to create a better life for all and a better future for all. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Kiva. We will now call on Honorable R. Jankelson to conclude the debate.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. The more we listen to ANC politicians, the less we expect from an ANC government. And this was shown again in this House this afternoon. The reason why the former national government fell and the reason why the ANC government is going to fall is because they believe their own rhetoric. And we heard it again during this debate this afternoon.
Will the speaker take a called question? Honorable Jankelson, Honorable
Dango.
Honorable Dango is asking, will you take a question? Honorable Jankelson, will you take a question from Honorable Dango? Do you hear me, Honorable Jankelson?
We can't hear you. I didn't hear what you said, Honorable Chair.
Honorable Dango is asking whether you will take a question.
Chair, now I don't have time for questions because the ANC's questions are just more rhetoric, and I already explained that.
So you already
I think we should just ask ourselves.
Take a question. Continue.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. We've heard about financing this afternoon.
This position.
Chair, I hope this isn't my time that the person's wasting on the virtual platform.
Honorable Jankelson, can you please continue?
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I heard some people this afternoon talking about the costs of land reform. Honorable Chairperson, in 2013, agricultural economist Nick Fink estimated that by then, and this is 10 years ago, government must have spent about 69 billion rand, and we're expected to spend another 14 billion in the next MTF after that. That was money supposed to be spent on land reform. But where is the land reform that this money was spent on? And I think we explained it during this debate when we referred to the high panel report, often referred to as the Motlanthe report. The money was stolen, the money was challenged to elites, and it was never given to support the beneficiaries of so-called land reform projects. And I explained the Vrede Dairy project during my initial debate as an explanation of this. Honorable Chairperson, unlike the other members who debated in this House today, the DA members at least came with positive policy proposals. I didn't hear any policy proposals from other members. The Honorable Mtetwa started off by talking about the Freedom Charter, and he said South Africa belongs to all who live in it. And we know this, and we understand this, because most of us here, perhaps unlike him, have actually read the Freedom Charter from the beginning to the end. And the Freedom Charter also says the land would be redivided among all who work on it. The original charter's promise was not to restrict private ownership, but race-based ownership. That was the original purpose of that clause in the charter. The ANC has distorted their own Freedom Charter in this country. Honorable Chair, the problem with the ANC is that it regards land as a threat that must be averted instead of a problem that must be resolved. The Honorable Peters from the Eastern Cape says that people are patient with the ANC's efforts and that this is not a problem. The problem is there's no urgency in the ANC's approach to empower people in former homeland areas, many of which are in the province where that MEC comes from. And we spoke about this afternoon during this debate. The Honorable NCOP emphasized the core of the DA's approach to urban and rural land, which is that land dwellers must become landowners. That's the only way to empower people. The Honorable Dlamini of the EFF wants people who were previously enslaved by colonial and apartheid governments to become permanent slaves of a fascist state that will entrench poverty, unemployment, and further inequality in South Africa. That is, in fact, what the EFF will bring to this country, and that is what they are proposing.
On a point of order, Chair.
Chair, my honorable...
On a point of order.
Honorable Johnson, there is a point of order, Honorable Dlamini. Your order.
The member must not distort the stance of the EFF for their own gain.
That's not a point of order.
He must not
That
do
is not a point
that.
of order. That is
Honorable
not a point
Must
of
not
order.
distort the
Honorable
stance
Nana.
of the
Honorable Nana,
EFF.
Honorable
Do not
Nana.
do that. Do not do that.
Please.
Honorable Dlamini,
Don't
thank you very
distort the
much. That
stance
is not
of
a,
the EFF.
that is not a point
Carry
of
on with your
order.
speech, but do not
Anita,
distort us.
ndintwana order.
That
Bekusukudala.
is not
Hayi,
Anita,
khawuba
ndicela.
Shut up,
ngumntu
Nana,
point
shut
of
up.
order.
But you can just keep
Honorable
quiet.
Dlamini.
Keep
Ali,
quiet.
keep quiet.
Let us continue, please. Honorable Jenkinson, you may conclude because you all know have right about
His
the
time is up, Chair.
You have half a minute, you can conclude.
Yes, Mr. Mtetwa, your time is up.
Honorable Chairperson, I hope you're keeping time with all these interruptions. Chairperson, my colleague from the Free State in the ANC spoke about the importance of water in land reform projects. Well, I encourage him to actually go to the Free State and see how the ANC is managing water in that province, because the town of Parys is sitting on the Vaal River, and the people in that town do not have access to clean and regular sources of water. He spoke about agri-villages as a way of dealing with land reform. But I dare him to go back to the Free State and go to the Diatalawa agri-village, a village that I have been to in the last 10 years. And I've got photographs to show how this 150 million rand invested has deteriorated, and how the beneficiaries of that project are now today unemployed and in poverty.
Your time is
Honorable
up.
Chair, there's nothing worse than what there's nothing
Sit down, your
worse
time is
for a
up.
politician to do, and no greater crime
Hey, sit down. Your
than
time
to
is up.
create expectations and to steal those
Hey,
expectations.
Chief, sit
from
down.
the
Your time is
people.
up. Your time
Thank
is
you.
up.
I'm sure.
Thank you very much.
The ANC have stolen half my time
Hayibo, usakhuluma.
as well, Chair.
I gave you all your time back. Please, Honorable Jenkinson, I gave you all your time back. So you can see, because you started 16:24. And where is the time now? Where I gave you all your time back. Thank you, Honorable Member.
Not
That
only
concludes the
did
debate.
the next elections,
I
they
wish
lost this
to
debate
thank
as
the
well.
MEC. I gave him almost 5 minutes more. I wish to thank the MECs, all permanent and special delegates, for availing themselves for the debate. Honorable delegates, we are concluding the business of the day. The House is adjourned.
Chair,
But we
before
are
you do that, can we say farewell to Mr.
But we are
Select?
requesting, I'm still speaking. Give me the necessary respect. Honorable delegates, can you please remain for the briefing on the Taking Parliament to the People program? It will be done by the administration, and Advocate Nonyane will actually indicate how it is going to happen. But with regards to the House, it is adjourned. Just stay back for the briefing. Thank you. Now, whoever was speaking can speak. My my part is over.
Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Advocate, I think you must take over and do the briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chairperson. Good afternoon, honorable members. Good afternoon, honorable members.
Good afternoon, Advocate.
Afternoon, Advocate. I hope the other members are still there. They are.
Yes, there are a few members here, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, no, we're still here.
We're all here. Okay, thank you very much, honorable members. We're not going to take a lot of your time.
Honorable members, I think the briefing is about to start. The briefing is about to start. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks, honorable members.
What am I? Dola Fate.
Advocate Nonyane?
Secretary.
Yes, can we proceed?
Could colleagues just give me the sharing rights so that I can put the program on the screen?
Yeah, can
And
we proceed?
I see the screens in the house, they are also off. If they can just switch them on so that members can see the program on the screen.
Can we proceed, Advocate? Advocate Nonyane?
Yes, can you hear me, Secretary?
Yes, I can hear you. Can we proceed?
Yes, I'm asking our colleague just to give me the sharing rights so that I can beam the program for members.
Okay, you have distributed the program to members, am I correct? Advocate Nonyane?
Indeed, they were distributed.
Documents were distributed to members, Secretary.
Okay, can we proceed then? Can we proceed?
Honorable members.
Thank you very much, honorable
Initially-
member.
Can you hear me?
Okay, proceed, Advocate Nonyane.
Okay. Yes. Honorable members, I'm just going to, the program will be structured as follows. I'm going to talk to the program of the actual visit. Thanks, at least has been beamed on the screen. And thereafter, there's also a program on site visit. And the last then will be briefing on logistics, of flights and accommodation, so that at least members have got a totality of the whole visit. And I think there will be an opportunity as well for members just to ask if there are any questions that they would like to pose to us. And in respect of the program, I'm not sure whether I can sit down because of on my screen it's a little bit, can you move the program to the next page, please?
Recording stopped.
Thank you. Honorable members, as you all know by now, the departure is scheduled on Monday, that is the 14th,